everybody? Welcome back, and today we're actually discussing some of the changes in Squad since 7.2 released. And I'm not just talking about the gunplay updates or some of the bug fixes. I'm talking about how map voting and unit voting has changed the way games are playing out. So if you're new to the channel or you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, leave a like, drop a comment down below with your thoughts. Are you noticing the same thing, or is it a little bit different from your perspective? And let's dive in. Outside of the infantry combat overhaul, I feel like this is one of the biggest updates I've seen to Squad in quite some time. And of course, the infantry combat overhaul remains a little bit of a topic amongst the community. And that makes sense because it was such a significant change in the direction of the game, as well as just how you play it on a day-to-day basis. And with that update, you saw a really heightened need for teamwork, especially in things like mechanized infantry to help move soldiers forward, especially with things like suppression playing a bigger factor in how infantry can maneuver. And I remember in the first few days after the infantry combat overhaul, how many rounds just felt stagnant, like there was no movement. Well, in 7.2, I'm seeing an interesting trend that mirrors some of this. And this isn't a result of gunplay fixes, bug fixes, or anything like that. It is specific to the unit voting system. Unsurprisingly, it seems most folks are interested in the armor matchup between the faction that their team has chosen and the enemy team. And what I think is really interesting is you're starting to see some understanding of how the maps are going to affect your choice in terms of what units you're picking. For example, on Fallujah or a city map, you're less likely to take a bunch of armor directly into the city because you're just going to be challenged by AT at every turn. On more open maps, you're going to lean more on armor. If you're playing a more defensive strategy, or if you're playing invasion on defense, you might lean on a support group. So it's great to see folks adapting to the units and how they operate on different maps, how to utilize them based on certain scenarios. But where we still seem to lack is basic logistics movement. I've played multiple rounds lately where about 30% into the round, there's just no logistics movement. And I don't know if that's because in some cases you're more reliant on armored lodges, potentially tracked vehicles that take a little bit longer to get there, or if it's because that you may have picked an air assault group and you're more reliant on helicopters to provide the logistics movement that you need to progress during the round. But where I'm seeing the biggest drop off is getting fobs down for third and fourth objectives. Typically, the fob goes down on second objective as a defensive position, while the rest of the team might be pushing the middle points. Let's say that's third objective. It is taking a long time to get set up there. And typically, the longer you wait to get fob set up at these objectives puts your infantry at risk of being able to hold that position. It also makes it more difficult to place a fob and a hab to support that position, which can lead a newly placed radio or the logistics vehicle to set it up at risk of getting destroyed by the enemy team. So in addition to the voting system and the slowdown, what we also have on the other side is a lowered ticket level for both teams at 250 instead of 300, specifically within random advanced and secure and advanced and secure. Now, a couple of things come with this ticket change. First of all, everything is a little bit more expensive, even though the price hasn't changed, right? It's a little bit more value to keep your armor alive. The same goes for your radios. I think it also puts emphasis on armor working with the infantry and staying somewhat unified in terms of their ability to push together. But with infantry in those vehicles, you also need to incorporate logistics movement into these pushes. But long before we're able to sort of work together in this unified fashion, we're just having a breakdown in the logistics movement forward. The armor is often facing fights, typically without infantry support because habs can't get placed quick enough or in areas that can support vehicles. This is going to put more stress on infantry squad leaders to make sure that they're getting enough logistics forward to build the appropriate amount of habs for attack or defense. In most cases, the inability to move logistics forward and set up new fobs ends up turning into a little bit of a meat grinder, potentially on a second back cap or something like that, where you're just going to bleed tickets playing defense, and maybe by then you're already at a disadvantage ticket-wise, depending on how well the other team is doing. Perhaps it's just a stalemate. Simultaneously, if we're seeing an imbalance with regards to the armor from your team to the enemy team, it's really more significant that those fobs get up because that may be the advantage you have. For example, if you're playing a support unit type, you can put multiple habs on every fob, giving you a distinct advantage from an infantry perspective. But then if we look at the air assault unit type, you're going to be much more limited in terms of what armor you're going to have available. For example, your tank may be on a 30-minute timer. But you do have a couple of advantages. They're going to help balance this out. For example, you're going to have the advantage of speed with 3 helicopters to position infantry maybe along forward areas early in the round. You're also going to get the option of placing an extra tow at every fob. But again, this goes back to logistics. If you have the ATGMs down, how do you keep them supplied? Because those can eat up ammo. So sometimes you may have more tracked lodges than you do wheeled lodges, which is going to slow down logistics. Your helicopters have a longer respawn time than they used to, so that's going to be a detriment if you start losing helicopters. So what do you need to be doing to prepare for rounds? The first thing I would suggest doing is making sure that you are taking a look at the map and figuring out where objectives are going. You can take a look at this on the map voting page. You can see where the objectives are to give you some indication of where your team needs to potentially progress or cover to capture objectives efficiently. This is important in random, advanced, and secure, and finding out what objectives might be after the revealed objective on invasion layers. There's plenty of times where if the first or second objective is going west, that you can pretty much rely on that layer being a western layer, meaning all of your objectives will be on that side of the map. And that is not foolproof, because you can still get the situation where an objective might go to the opposite side of the map or down a middle lane instead of the far west. I'd also take this time to identify clusters of objectives where there's a higher percentage chance that the point may go, so you can position your squad there, potentially to set up a fob to help out your team later. When you're moving on to the process of picking a unit type, if you've had the luxury of being able to see what the enemy team is choosing, obviously you want to make sure that you balance against that. But it can also, like I mentioned earlier, rely heavily on your map. So while it can be helpful to have the perfect armor matchup with vehicles that counter each other, that's not always going to be the options that you have available. So obviously for larger, more wide open maps, it's not uncommon for teams to want to rely more heavily on unit types that are going to bring armor with them. And that makes sense to help cover the infantry, especially over longer distances where they have to project their logistics and troops forward. Now, sometimes terrain can play a factor, or maybe that the map is based primarily in a city, which may play a factor in your team leaning away from something where there's a lot of tracked vehicles, because it's going to be a tough time moving those throughout a dense city with anti-tank soldiers everywhere. But of course, you do have to make sure that logistics play a factor in this decision. Again, with a wider open map, do you want more helicopters? Do you want more wheeled lodges? Do you want to lean on armored, tracked lodges? And something else I've seen a lot lately is more transports being utilized for different units. And those can be really helpful for backcapping. So let's take a look at a potential rollout. So let's say you have some light vehicles. Maybe you use those to disrupt some backline or get some troops up to a forward position quickly. So we'd have these guys move to the fourth cap, potentially in the middle. Perhaps your logi then goes to the cluster here of second objectives, sort of in the middle of the map. This could give you a defensive fob near your second objectives. Then perhaps your helicopter, along with a small infantry squad, is going to actually mobilize and move to the eastern side of the map, near a couple of third point and fourth point objectives. The infantry and the helicopter could set down another fob, giving you an attack position at a cluster of third and fourth objectives. And you're doing all of this while a transport with an infantry squad actually moves and takes the first cap, potentially the second cap depending on where it goes. Now this is pretty bare bones, but if you had another logistics vehicle, maybe you push that in a different area where a potential third cap might be, splitting some of your logistics up. But ultimately this plan is to get logistics forward and not just have it stuck on a second objective with nothing actually pushing your team forward to third and fourth caps. Ideally, once you have that fob down on your second objective, that could be your defensive backbone. The helicopter can begin refilling that if they aren't able to advance much further, and that logi that was on second cap can then quickly backfill and move into a third cap position or a fourth cap position, maybe leapfrogging depending on the situation at the next objectives. But this has all become a really interesting thing to start planning out, because there's so much more depth added when you go into map voting along with unit voting. Because really the rollout that we just talked about is something that you could use even prior to 7.2. The difference is that you may be picking a unit that doesn't have the right sort of vehicle assets in place to be able to maneuver well across a really large map. And this is something that we're all going to be learning together over the next several weeks and months to figure out what units are going to apply to what situation the best. So while many advanced players are going to have some of this already in their tool belt, along with the adaptability to play with any given situation, whereas I know that there's going to be some newer players looking for some ideas around how to take in the information that's available during the map voting process and apply it to the round. So I hope that this helps, and something I'm going to be looking at is how I can start breaking down unit types to give folks a better idea of what they're voting on or what they should be voting against depending on those situations. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, drop a comment down below with your thoughts or anything that I missed that I should add into a future video, and I'll catch you next time.